Welcome again to Discovering Disabilities in Dearborn, a podcast that highlights the stories, the challenges, and the stigma associated with disabilities. Our podcast was launched to eliminate these stigmas and to share the stories of our amazing community. As always, my name's Ale.
I'm Rashad.
And today we have the privilege of being joined by Amanda. Amanda, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello. All right. So I did not grow up in Dearborn, but I have a background. So I did grow up with a learning disability. I grew up in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area, and I moved here about, I guess, almost 4 years ago. My husband moved me here because he's from here. So I've been here for a few years. I was diagnosed with a learning disability when I was in first grade, pretty early on, by my first grade teacher, who I still communicate with, ironically. She's actually still a really big part of my life. She had approached my mom, and she had told my mom, I think Amanda is struggling with her reading and just understanding and comprehending what she's reading. So I got evaluated, and I was diagnosed with a reading comprehension learning disability. I didn't really notice any differences or anything that was different about me, I think, until I reached third or fourth grade. I was being taken out of class and working with, another teacher. And so I would ask this teacher and ask my mom, why am I not with the rest of my students, and why am I being taken out of class?
So when you were first diagnosed, when you were in first grade, you were probably about 7 years old. Do you remember that moment where you were diagnosed, or is it all blurry to you?
I do not remember any of it.
Okay.
I would say I don't remember much until like third or fourth grade, when I started being taken out of classes.
And how did it make you feel when you were being taken out of your classes?
I felt uncomfortable. I felt really different, and I didn't understand why I couldn't be with the rest of my peers and why I couldn't participate in some of the other things that they were participating in the classroom. When I was explained that, you're just struggling and you need, more support, I understood that, but it still didn't make me feel any better with the fact that I still felt different.
So when you'd be taken out of those classrooms, are you like going to, a social worker or somebody in the school who's helping you learn those concepts, or is it just like you're taken out and you're working somewhere else?
So yeah, I'm being taken out into just a separate room, and it's with like a special ed teacher specifically. And so she would work with me on reading. We would be working on the same lesson plan as like my peers in the classroom, but it would just be one-on-one.
Okay, so there were no other students with you getting the same accommodation.
Sometimes there would be one or two, but it was mostly just me, I remember.
Do you know the prevalence of your disability? You said it's a reading comprehension focused disability. So is that common at all? Do people have it? What if some people have it and they don't know that they have it?
I would say it's very common. I mean, if you're reading a book sometimes and you have to go back because you don't understand the pages, is that common for both of you?
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm not saying it's a disability, but I think it's more common than we think it is. If I read a page 5-6 times, I wouldn't be able to translate what I just read and give you like a short summary at all. It would be like I just read nothing.
Yeah, that happens with videos too. Like I like to study watching videos, and I just watch them over and over.
Right, because you don't remember what happened.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. So what about in middle school? Like if you started to notice around third, fourth grade that, things were a little bit different for you, when you got to middle school or even high school, did you start to like accept it, or were you still kind of unsure what was going on?
So I accepted it. I did make friends who had learning disabilities, so it made me feel a little more comfortable because we were always together all the time being taken out of class. Or I think in middle school I stopped being taken out of classes, and I just had like an extra teacher with me and like whoever else had a learning disability, so that I was able to get the extra support that I needed. But as you get older, it starts really setting in with you that you're different and that you feel different and that you're not learning or understanding the way that your peers are. I would say what really bothered me the most was when I saw my peers being in like AP courses, like more advanced courses, and I was never advancing to the next courses because I just had a hard time understanding, right? And I just needed more support.
So were you placed in these special education courses throughout middle school and throughout high school?
Yes. So I don't know how it works exactly here in, the state of Michigan, but I had an IEP, which is like a standardized, like,
Individualized.
yeah,
education plan.
individualized education program. And so it would expire after 4 years. So every 4 years, I'd have to basically get it renewed, or I went from middle school to high school, elementary school to middle school. So most people don't know this, but my parents had me tested every 4 years by a certain doctor. It's like a psychologist, but they specialize in learning disabilities. And it's a very extensive test. It's like 4, 5, 6 hours long. And you have to do it on a weekend, or I just mostly did it on a weekend every 4 years. And so they would re-diagnose me with my learning disability so that I was able to get the support I needed in school. So sometimes my learning disability would get better, and sometimes maybe it would get worse, or I would need certain areas with more support. So for example, I needed more support in math because I was terrible at math, I think starting like in 5th or 6th grade. And so when they did the test that year, they realized, hey, she needs more help with math. And so I was diagnosed with a math disability.
It's good that they keep it present. They're always checking and modifying it. Was your disability more or less constant, or was it always like focused on reading and math, or was it changing throughout?
It was focused more on reading and math. I would say definitely reading the most. I do not like math. I don't know many people who like math, maybe besides my husband. He's a finance major, but it's hard to be good at something you don't always like, right? So I don't think I ever enjoyed it because I was not good at it. Just like reading. I hated reading because I didn't understand what I was reading.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the label LD, especially like as you get to high school, that becomes a more prominent. We start understanding labels, and a big part of being an adolescent is your identity and what you identify as and who you are as an individual. So as we were researching our studies, we found a lot of articles talking about the label of being learning disabled and how that affects the self-esteem of an individual. Did that ever affect you? Did that ever, was that ever playing in the background of your mind that, hey, I have a learning disability, and that label LD, did that ever bother you in any way?
Yeah, it actually bothered me a lot. It hurt me the most because I always felt so different. And I didn't want to be labeled as someone who had a learning disability, right? Because even though I wasn't great at math and reading comprehension, that doesn't mean I wasn't like a smart individual. And I didn't start realizing that until I got to like my junior and senior year in high school. I wasn't book smart, but I have a lot of common sense, and I would say I'm, smart in other aspects of life, but I wasn't book smart. Growing up with 2 brothers who are extremely smart and did really well in school, it was really hard for me as well because I always compared myself to them. Even though my parents didn't, I did, because I was like, well, I'm the oldest, and here I am struggling in school, coming home from school every day upset because I failed a test or because I'm not understanding the lesson plan. So being labeled, I think, creates a worse stigma for kids struggling in school. I don't think labeling a child is very helpful to them and telling them, well, you have a learning disability, and so, you're maybe struggling. I think explaining it to them in a different sense of, we are all different. We learn in different ways. And it's okay that you don't learn like everyone else does, because you and I learn differently. You and I learn differently, right? And so I think it's important to explain that to a child and to a teenager who feels different, right?
You mentioned that you're a parent now. Do you feel like your experiences growing up with your learning disability kind of molded your parenting style?
I would say maybe a little bit, yes. My daughter is only 18 months old. So I think that as she gets older and if she's struggling in school, I will know how to deal with it. And I'm not saying that my parents didn't, because honestly, they did a great job. They were very supportive of me. They provided me with everything they possibly could for me to be successful in life. And honestly, I owe a lot of my success to them, because even though they didn't know what to do, they provided me with the right resources to help me succeed. So I think whatever my daughter struggles in, I would be the best person to really help her succeed.
I want to go back to your brothers and the conversation about constantly comparing yourself to others, because I think that that's the mindset that affects a lot of people's mental health, and then that translates to other things such as depression and other debilitating or disabling conditions. How did you break out of that mindset?
I would say I didn't break out of it till I was in college. So I did struggle with mental health as a kid, but looking back at it, I realized that I was struggling with mental health as a kid. I didn't see it there. I think I definitely struggled with just depression and anxiety. I was always nervous to go to school, because if I had an exam, I knew I wasn't going to do well. Even though I studied so hard, it doesn't mean that I was going to pass, because I probably wasn't going to pass the test. So I just saw my brothers growing up, and they worked just as hard as I did, but they didn't have the struggle that I did. So I think when I hit college, I realized, okay, well, this doesn't define me. Having a disability doesn't define me at all. I just have to figure out ways to overcome the way that I'm feeling. And I think once I had my internships in college, I did work in government contracting when I was in college, throughout the summer. And I had some really great jobs. And so I was trying to set myself up to be successful. So it was difficult, and I did struggle a lot with it. But I had to realize for myself that I can't compare myself.
Has your learning disability ever affected you in the workplace?
Honestly, no. It hasn't affected me in the workplace at all. I would say I think I've succeeded more at a younger age with my learning disability. I have to read things at work. I don't have to do any math, but I do have to read a lot. And so I just make sure that I need to give myself extra time to process and to actually understand what I'm reading.
So, high school, a lot of people can get by with a learning disability or just anything, given that they're properly accommodated. But it seems like when you go to college, the accommodations are all the more important there because of the intensity and the difficulty there. So tell us a little bit about your experience with accommodations in college.
Yeah. So I kind of want to backtrack just a little bit. So when I was a junior in high school, my dad was like, okay, you're going to go to college. Where do you think you're going to go? Let's explore options. But he, both my parents said that we haven't been to school in so long, so we don't know what the best college is for you to have the best accommodations, because they wanted me to go to a school that had good accommodations for me so that I would succeed. So they hired me a college counselor. Have you guys heard of a college counselor? No. I hadn't either. So these college counselors tailor to kids who maybe have a learning disability or just need help in general finding out what the right college is for them. So my dad found this amazing college counselor. She actually passed away about 6 years ago, but she was a huge part of my life for a short period of time. So she provided us with, about 10 to 12 schools that had great accommodations. And I toured, I would say, a little more than half of the schools. My mom and I, and my dad sometimes would come with us. We would take the train because I lived in D.C., so the train was really accessible to go everywhere. We took the train to Connecticut, Maine, just a few other places, just to tour these colleges that were specifically tailored to kids with learning disabilities. I ended up going to a school an hour-ish away from my parents, and where I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. It's beautiful in the mountains, and I fell in love with it as soon as I got there. I'm like, this is the school that I'm going to go to. They accommodated to me beyond my measure. There was a really great director there in the learning disability. She was a learning disability director, and she was life-changing for me. I still communicate with her. She made sure that I was successful at college and that I did well.
Are there any like learning strategies you develop throughout school that you want to share with our viewers?
Yeah, so I would say everyone thinks that flashcards are so great and like you need to use flashcards. They did not work for me at all. Sometimes I would have my mom or dad read to me and just read me the book or read me a few pages, and we would talk about them together. They would ask me, hey, what did you read? Or I do this with my tutor because I did have extensive tutoring from elementary school to high school. What did you read? Let's talk about it. It's not always like the traditional way of studying because it doesn't work for everyone. So I did a lot of that, and I would read it out loud to myself and write down a summary of what I just read. So it's better to interpret it in your own words about something that you're reading instead of reading the book and saying, okay, well, what did that just say? So I would just write what I just read.
Yeah, I think that's a very effective learning tool, just because it forces your brain to highlight the important information from what you had just read. A lot of our viewers and us are familiar with extra time as an accommodation. Are you aware of any other accommodations that are available for students with learning disabilities?
So another accommodation I had, which I'm not sure is very, I guess very popular maybe, is I used to have some of my teachers read me tests out loud, like in a separate room, because I just didn't understand what I would read. So I would say that for me, that was a really big one. But I did get extra time on all of my tests as well.
Okay. I've also heard, I was listening to a TED Talk about an individual with a learning disability, and they mentioned that they had like notes that they were able to take on exams. Is that a possibility, given, I think, the neuropsych evaluation stipulating that that's a condition? Is that at all possible for some individuals with learning disabilities?
So to be honest, I was able to do that a few times, but it just depends on the teacher. Because technically it's cheating, right? If you're like on a test and you have notes with you. Was that what you were referring to? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
okay.
was referring to. I don't think it's cheating if it's needed, right?
Yeah,
because
I
that's the
agree.
whole point of the accommodation. A lot of people think, well, this person has an accommodation, they're getting the easy way out, but in reality, it's just a means by which you're leveling the playing field.
I think we look at it like that, but some people don't, right?
Agree.
They'll think that it's cheating, and I agree with you. Unfortunately, the people who need accommodations, I think that should be allowed. But it just depended on my teacher. But that did happen in some cases, and it's really helpful.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
So life after school.
yeah.
Let's talk about what you're up to now.
Okay, so I graduated college. I had a job immediately after I graduated, which I was really excited for. I worked in government contracting, and I worked a lot. My first job, I worked about 60 to 70 hours a week.
Sorry, Amanda, what was your degree in?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, I was just
Yeah.
curious, because how do you get a government contracting job?
Yeah, I was a business major and communications major.
Okay.
I love writing. If I could turn writing into a job, I really would. I would love to just write. I think I'm really good at it, and I actually had a really great professor in college that taught me how to write really well. So went to government contracting. I worked in human resources because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a teacher for special ed, but I quickly found out that my heart was too heavy, and I wore my heart on my sleeve, and I wouldn't be able to leave work at work because that was me as a kid. And it was very emotional leaving school. And I'm like, I'm worried about this child, and I'm worried about this child. So like my sophomore year when I did practicum hours at the schools, and I'd go, watch the teachers and watch the kids, I just got too invested, and I was like, this is just going to like devastate me. So I had to change my major to communications and business. So went into government contracting. I worked in human resources. It was a really cool job. I met a lot of wonderful people. I was at my first job for about 3 years, and I went to work with another government contracting company, and I worked in the Pentagon, which was probably the coolest place I think I'll ever work. I met a lot of really wonderful people. It seems very surreal when you're in this place that you see, in movies and like you pass by if you're visiting DC or that you hear about. So it was a really cool place to work. And then I worked for another corporation. I got out of government contracting. So I was just working a lot, and it was just weighing heavy on me. And I kind of wanted to get my youth back a little bit. And then I moved here, and I'm working in consulting for IT. So I've been doing IT for about like 5-6 years now.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you love to write too.
Yeah.
What do you got in front of you?
So I just kind of started writing about my life and what I experienced as a kid and how I struggled and kind of how I overcame my disability. I wrote a lot about my family and my mental health. I think that if you have a learning disability as a child and you don't have family support, it is nearly impossible to become successful unless you branch out and you find your own ways to be you find your own ways to be successful. I was fortunate enough to have really amazing parents who provided me with the tools and the resources for me to be successful. I had tutors 3-4 times a week after school. It was so draining. I actually hated it. But now I see how it really helped me, succeed. It was absolutely miserable to go to school and then with someone with learning disability, and you're mentally and emotionally drained already from the day and trying to learn, and then you're coming home and your tutor is waiting for you, and it's like, great, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be taught more, and I just want a break. So my parents really pushed me. My dad was a immigrant. He moved here when he was 3. My mom, she moved to the U.S. when she was 14. And they had to build a life for themselves. And my dad always told me that it's not where you start in life, it's where you end. So just because you have a learning disability, that doesn't mean this is going to be who you are for the rest of your life. But as a kid, it was really hard to see that because you're a kid, right? You don't see like 5-10 years down the road of I'm going to be successful one day.
So we mentioned this book that you're writing and, the intersection of disabilities with mental health. Sorry to put you on the spot, but do you mind reading a small excerpt?
Yeah. So I'll talk about mental health. So I was hard on myself, and most times I would leave school feeling defeated. I often asked myself, why did this happen to me? I questioned myself, my existence in the world, and wondered if I would get through this.
Wow. I think that's really deep, and I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you or someone you know would be interested in being a guest on the podcast, or if you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out to us on Instagram at DreamDearborn, or on our website at dreamdearborn.org, or on our email at disabilitiesproject@umich.edu. Thank you. Welcome back to this episode of Discovering Disabilities in Dearborn with Amanda. Amanda, did your disability ever affect your mental health? And how did you overcome that challenge if you have overcome it?
Yeah, so although I wasn't diagnosed as a kid, I strongly believe that I suffered from depression. I felt really isolated. I dreaded going home. I sometimes cry in my room because I didn't want to study for a test and because I knew I was going to fail. So my grandfather actually passed away when I was 12, and he was a huge, huge, huge part of my life. I mean, he was like my best friend. And I think that brought out my depression because I was struggled so much, the fact that he had passed away, and I didn't know how to handle it. I spent so much time with my grandparents. They lived down the street from me growing up. So I started seeing a therapist. I think I was like 13, 14. I was in middle school or high school at the time. He died when I was 12. And so that helped me a lot by talking about my depression and just what I was struggling with. And it wasn't always just about my grandfather, but it was just about what I was going through. Having a disability still affects me to this day because it's just such a big part of my life that I grew up with. It doesn't affect me in a negative way. I feel very positively about where I am in life, and I'm really proud of where I am. So I would say that I've definitely overcome the way that I felt when I was a kid and a teenager with a disability.
It's really important to talk about the intersection between disabilities and mental health because people with disabilities are disproportionately affected by mental health issues. And you're an example of a person who's overcome so much and is considered successful by society. But I want to ask you about other individuals who are not necessarily deemed successful by society because of their particular disability, either, their learning disability never being properly accommodated, and as a result, they couldn't go to college. So they constantly live in the shadow of others, or, never end up getting a successful job. What would you say to those people?
I would say it makes me feel sad first. That makes me sad that they feel like that they couldn't go to college or they couldn't succeed in life because they had a disability. I would say that it doesn't define you. It doesn't define who you are just because you're struggling or just because you're physically impaired or you have a learning disability. Disabilities are all shapes and forms, but it doesn't matter. I think that people with disabilities are sometimes smarter than the normal average human because we process things very differently and we think about things differently.
Yeah, and it matters how we define intelligence in the first place, which is a very philosophical conversation to have. So, there are many different dimensions of intelligence and being considered smart. Like you said, you never considered yourself school smart, but you considered yourself street smart.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I did go to school with some people I did know growing up that didn't feel like that they could make anything out of their lives because of this disability. And it's sad. I think that we all felt that way at some point. I definitely felt that way at some point. But I did overcome that feeling. And I don't think that everyone can overcome that feeling because it takes a lot of work. It's not just waking up one morning and saying, hey, I feel great today and I'm not going to have a disability. It's years and years and years of work, of self-work. I journal a lot. Like I said, I love to write. So I would just talk about my experiences, and just writing them down helped me a lot. But I would say for anyone who's struggling through this now, don't give up. You have no idea where life is going to take you. Just continue to work hard. We have to work harder than others. For those who have learning disabilities, I feel like I always had to work harder than everyone else. And I'm not saying that I did work harder. I'm just saying I felt that way, and I tried to work harder as much as I possibly could. So just work hard and continue to push through. Seek help when you need it. And if you have parental support, go to them, ask them, and tell them what you need help with. So I would just say keep going because you don't know where life's going to take you.
Speaking of support, do you have any role models in your life? Anybody you look up to?
Yeah, so I would say my dad. My dad is probably my biggest role model. Growing up, he was a huge role model for me. So was my grandfather. So my dad immigrated to the U.S. when he was 3. He, him and his family moved here with absolutely nothing, and he ended up becoming a successful lawyer and someone that I really look up to. He's very humble and he works very hard. He just taught me a lot of wonderful life lessons. So I would say my dad is a very big role model of mine.
So you highlighted your dad being a really big part of your, support network, but I want to extend a little bit further outward. Do you have any support networks that you're a part of that, emphasize learning disabilities or any support groups of that nature?
Honestly, I'm not a part of any support groups. I would love to be a part of a support group, to be a mentor, and to be just a shoulder to lean on, and just support for parents. Not only support for parents, but support for children and kids going through a learning disability. As a child, I felt very alone and isolated, that no one understood what I was going through. So I just want to be able to relate to a kid and help them as much as I can, because that genuinely makes me happy.
By the way, I don't think we clearly defined what a learning disability is. You mentioned your particular learning disability.
Yeah.
Do you know any, cursory definition on the top of your head?
So I wouldn't say I know a definition of a learning disability, like what the actual definition is. But for me, I would say, in my own words, that the way that you learn is just different from others,
Okay.
without putting a label on it.
So you mentioned that you really want to support kids with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you envision you might be able to do that?
Just like having a communication with the child or with the student, and just talking to them about what they're going through and providing like my story. I think that if I had someone else growing up that had a learning disability and was diagnosed, and they were communicating with me about their life and how they've succeeded, I think it would have helped me so much.
So a mentorship type thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's very feasible to implement in schools, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think that they have them. I think that's part of the problem.
At least not particularly tailored to people with disabilities.
Yeah, no. I think it would be like an outside organization maybe, or, yeah.
No, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's good that you have that vision. I really think that your book will definitely help other people, because it's a means by which you're going to share this message, and it'll be a person from our community who is sharing that, which is, all the more powerful. And you being on here, that's another means of mentorship for people. And anyone can definitely check out your Instagram, and I'm sure you won't mind if people reach out, right?
No, I don't mind at all. How have you struggled with someone, being a family member with people with disability, with your siblings with disabilities and your cousins with disabilities? How have you struggled personally?
So life's been tough to watch when I'm, looking at how they're treated. Several times growing up, they like be physically, hurt, and verbally, and it's like it's not right at all, and they can't do anything about it. That's life to them, like being helpless in that moment at those times, and then me, like personally, I'm younger than my sister, so there wasn't much I could do at my age growing up. Now it's a little bit different. You don't really see the physical. I know it happens still, the physical assault and the verbal assault, but I don't see it as much because my sister's older and we have her in environments that are more welcoming and more friendly. But I know there are families out there who are dealing with that, people with disabilities out there who are dealing with that. So, and just because they have a disability doesn't mean they're any different than anybody else. A lot of times kids will be in school being bullied, or online, and they don't want to tell anybody about it because they're scared that the bullying might go to a level that's much worse. But I think having conversations with not just kids, but like anybody with disabilities, sitting down with them, trying to understand them and asking them, those personal questions. Is anything happening in school? Is anything happening at work, in your life? Can I help you with anything? Are you being hurt? Not just physically, mentally, emotionally. I think that would go a long way. And I wish I was, older back then, so I could actually understand and be able to provide that support. But at least I can now with my niece and my nephew, because I am older than them and they're still in the beginning of their lives growing up. So,
how is your family supporting?
My parents treated her no differently than they did treat like myself. For example, we'd always go to parent-teacher conferences normally. Go services, schools, try to enroll them even in programs that I was enrolled in.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
That's really amazing.
Yep.
Not all parents are like super supportive or treat their kids like the same way because one of them has a disability and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
I would say I was treated like a little bit differently than my brothers, but not in a way that my parents just catered to me a little more. I was also the oldest, so they maybe focused on me a little more at times. And then as I got like a little older, they would start focusing on my brothers when they needed it. But I think it's important to treat your kids all the same, no matter, you know, what disability they have, no matter, you know, what they're going through. But sometimes we just need a little more attention.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
tends to happen. It's not, and
Yeah.
it's not like looking at it from a perspective of like, oh, I feel bad for, you know, this child because they have a disability, so I'm going to care for them more. You know, it's more so that this child actually needs more help, you know, needs guidance a little bit more than my other children. So I don't think it's wrong to look at it from that perspective. But like, you know, if you look at it in a way where it's like, oh, you know, I feel bad they have a disability, let me give them more because of that reason, then
It's bad.
Yep.
It's bad. I do want to touch on something that I didn't touch on that I think is really important. So to be honest, I never thought that I would be here in my life where I am today, ever in 1,000,000 years. I knew I was going to go to college. Well, actually, I didn't know I was going to get into a college, to be honest. I'm like, my grades suck. Like, who's going to accept me? Like, I basically failed high school, and they're going to think that I'm like this terrible student who doesn't care about school, which wasn't the case because I wrote a really good essay about. I actually should find my college essay about my struggles with my learning disability.
Nice.
So, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to end up in my life where I am today. I didn't think I was going to be successful by any means. I didn't think that I was going to have a job after college. I just didn't see that in my future. But like, I didn't know what I saw. I just didn't think that I would be successful. And I think that without my parents like believing in me and like pushing me, I wouldn't be where I am today. What I'm passionate about is this. This is like one of the things in life that I could do for the rest of my life and be passionate about. Corporate world, I like it, but it's not my passion. My passion is helping children and helping families with learning disabilities. I have a business venture that I'm working on that I don't know when it's going to happen, but like, this is what I want to do. This is what I think I was called to do. This is what I was born to do. I feel really grateful and privileged that I experienced all of these things I did as a kid, because looking back on it and here I am today makes me really happy to see like what I accomplished in life.
It sounds like you really maximized your potential, and you know, with all the resources that you used, and you know, seeking help. I think that played a really important role in your life.
So you may have just revealed what your dream was, or touched on it a little at least. But usually at the end of every episode, we have something called a dream segment, where we ask our guests a question. Basically, we ask, what is your dream? It could be your dream related to disabilities or not related to disabilities, just anything in general. So Amanda, what is your dream?
My dream is to support families and children with learning disabilities and be a grounding for them. That's my dream.
We do hope your dreams come true. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. And a big thank you to all of our viewers watching at home. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Dream Dearborn, and check out our website, dreamdearborn.org. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.